Good evening, everybody. It is February 15th, 2023. This is Mike McCoo, Chairman of the Willington School Building Committee, calling the regular meeting to order at 6:33 p.m. We'll start right off with present to speak. Comments may be limited in time to allow all present to speak. We'll start in the room. Is there anyone in the room who would like to speak? All right, we'll go to the online group. I see Nick, your hand is up.
Hey, it's Nick Della, 49 Myrtle. Just want to touch on one point tonight, at least in the beginning. Hall School. So if that goes back to the Hall Foundation, it's my understanding that they're going to lose their tax exempt status. I also, in the understanding that property is valued approximately $5.5 million. I don't know if that's true, just stuff that I heard. If true, the tax for them is going to be approximately, after you do the 70% and all that calculation, approximately $120,000 that they're going to have to pay in property tax. I just don't see how a foundation that's not getting any revenue off this building is going to be able to afford $120,000 in property tax. Is the SBC foreseeing a potential where this property may get foreclosed on due to taxes not being paid, and the town now taking this property over for lack of payment on taxes? I think it's just a situation that really needs to be looked upon. That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else online? If you'd like to speak, either Donna Cook, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Donna Cook, 77 Common Road. I just want to encourage the SBC to determine the true cost of the new school to the town, including all of the costs, whether it's roads or bringing water to it. And I think it would be prudent to plan for water to be brought to the new location, and then not need it versus the other way around, because that can be quite pricey. And also to submit this to the Board of Finance for a full review based upon what we know maybe, or based upon what might be happening with the new budgets. I've heard some pretty scary numbers from other departments. I'm pleased that the Board of Ed was able to keep theirs at a good low rate, but I don't think that everybody else is going to be able to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else online? Either raise your little yellow hand or unmute and call out your name. All right, we'll have present to speak at the end of the meeting also. Anything in the room before we move on? Okay. Next is chairperson's report. In the interest of keeping our schedule tonight, I know we have a lot to talk about, especially in the financial stuff. So I think I'll hold off on my chairperson's report till the end of the meeting. That way, if we're running out of time, we can just move on. So I don't tie up too much time. Welcome, Peter. Thank you. Approval of minutes. SBC regular minutes of February 1st, 2023. Can I get a motion to accept those?
She can make a motion.
I can.
You can make a
That's
motion.
all I can do.
Okay.
I can move in second, that's it.
Okay.
You're on
So we have a motion. Can we get a second for accepting? We got a second from Jim. Thank you.
That's all we can do.
Okay, discussion on the minutes.
Jim, thank you.
Any discussion from board members on the minutes of February 1st? Seeing none, let's vote. All of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? All right, seeing none, motion passed. Can I get a motion to accept the minutes of the SBC special meeting on February 3rd, 2023?
So moved.
In a second, please. All right, discussion, any additions or corrections?
Peter, there's one right back here. Peter.
Oh, thank you.
All right, seeing none, let's vote. All those in favor of accepting the minutes for February 3rd, 2023, say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions or nays? Seeing none, motion carries. Communications, the email traffic to the SBC inbox has slowed down quite a bit over the last couple of weeks. I think there are only 4 emails. One of them was, did you get my previous email? And it was sent through another chain and I forwarded it to the SBC email so that we have it in there. And so I'll get those in the next couple of days out to the committee. I just didn't have time to PDF them and send them out. Anything else in communications? No. Hi, Catherine. Okay. Also on that, just while we're on the emails, Phil and I have each been reviewing the emails as time allows, and we believe that everything has been asked, in the recent emails is either now was or is now in the FAQs, or something we just can't answer at this time, or has been answered regularly in meetings, so the information is out there.
Has that FAQ been pushed recently, updated?
I'm not sure what the last update, well, I don't remember the last update date.
It was like January 9th. is all I know.
What was it?
I think it was like January 9th. I haven't checked.
I think that's the latest date, right?
Okay, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, not since that January 9th. Some of these were answered in the earlier versions, some were answered in updates that happened up to January 9th. Okay, subcommittee reports. I think finance is going to be a bigger one for tonight, so let's get land and communications out of the way. The land assessment subcommittee did not meet. I just sent out updates. There were no action items required of that subcommittee. So I sent updates to the members of the subcommittee, and basically some of them are action items later tonight in new business, like appraisal, approving appraisals and stuff like that. And Scott will give us the update on the latest on the environmental study. And we also have the legal support that we used for the original letter of intent is working right now on the updates for the letter of intent. And the potential purchase agreement, should that be needed. So we have those documents prepared. And once we have drafts of those ready, we'll have a subcommittee meeting, review that stuff, and keep on moving with that. So that's it for land subcommittee, unless anyone has any questions. Oh, I will add, there has been, some questions from the public and some comments from within the committee that we should release the matrix of the properties we studied, which we will definitely do. I had hoped to do it before this meeting so I could say it was out there. I just didn't have time and I had to prioritize the financial stuff for tonight. But I have it from, Scott has emailed it to me, and I have it, and I just want to look it over and make sure that it agrees with like the meeting minutes from those meetings that we had, the land subcommittee meetings, and then we'll get that information out to the public.
Question on that though. So if something happens, this property falls through, environmental doesn't work out, don't we need to hold on to that information in case we have to pursue one of those properties?
So that's an interesting question. That's a very interesting question. You're not the first person who's asked me that either. So this is one of those things that's sort of a battle between getting as much information out to the public and if we needed if we need to make strategic decisions, which is why we had executive sessions for those negotiations. That's why the law allows that. So I'll certainly take input from the committee.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. So one, executive session, right? We talk about, things can't be talked about outside of. This is the one exception because you're discussing a negotiation. So once that has all completed, you can then discuss what went on. What I will say is if I recall, the matrix we looked at did not identify the property. It gave them, they had names, correct? Like,
We have the working documents that we worked with when we were in executive session do have the properties
So-
on them, including map, lot number, all that.
so maybe one of the things you could do with the private, not the town sites, but the private sites, until such time as there was an agreement, if there's a positive referendum, would be then to leave off those identifiers of the other land. You can see the matrix, just leaving off what property it is, so that it allows the committee to be able to go back into discussions. I don't, you know,
Just gonna have to take off a bunch of information though.
is it, yeah, I
Yeah.
cannot.
I'm just looking at it real quick and I mean, it's got
pretty
the
easy to
address on it.
figure out.
It's got the location. It'll say very blatantly, you know, center west side. It'll say the cost of land at the appraisal, which if you start doing some searches, you're quickly gonna be able to identify the land.
Any bridge is gonna get you there. You know, if it's for sale, so.
Well,
But
so,
we didn't look at only, that this
For
committee
sale.
didn't look at only things that were for sale.
True.
But they looked at every piece of property that fit into a
certain
criteria,
parameters.
so,
Right.
you know, that's a.
Well, I think the larger list that has the whole 127 on it, I think that we could release because it was a list, it was a search result, basically, of the town's land database, which anyone could essentially do, right? I mean,
Yes, you can, I mean, there's no denying how large parcels are from the information that's out there to the public.
The only issue is that I think the purpose of releasing it is to be upfront with, hey, we had a rubric. And you're not releasing the rubric if you just release the property. So Justin, I'm the one that asked you the same question.
you guys make the same.
And I think my thought at this point is, you know what? I think it's okay. I mean, if for some reason it fails, then we have to go back to the drawing board because every property that was on there was definitely not number one. There's a reason why. So would we go back to that property again? I'm not sure of that. Because we ruled it out. We ruled it out for a very specific reason. So I thought the same thing. I was questioning and I'm not sure if that helps your comments or not.
I'm bringing it up for discussion more than anything, you know,
Yeah.
because something happens, this fails, we gotta go back to square one, and you could end up having to negotiate more than what the market value is.
And I think what's important to note is even, and we said this as a committee, that there was a non-binding agreement on the piece of property that we are talking about. So there's no, there's nothing saying that there couldn't be a change, right? It's a non-binding agreement between both parties. So there could be a multitude of factors that could, you know, make this have to go back. But can I ask Scott, and I know this is an SBC, a Willington SBC committee decision, but I'm just curious, Scott, if you could give us some insight on, is there a typical time frame in which that information is released?
No, I mean, it really depends on the development of the land purchase. So, you know, again, I provided the information to Mike. Yeah, the overall list really just shows all the properties that we were reviewing. But I mean, every situation is different. But, you know, certainly I'm not sure what the, you know, I'll talk about it in my report, and we're still waiting for some final things to come through as far as the land goes. I don't believe at this point, every indication that we're hearing from the environmental engineers is that there's not a deal breaker associated with that review at this time. So I'm not sure what other, you know, even if the referendum failed, I'm not sure what other condition might come into play that would negate you know, the potential use of what you deemed was the best site for the project.
So how about this, so that we can move on, I would ask all the members, if you have any thoughts, email me directly over the next couple of days, and we'll see if we can come up with some consensus and decide what to do fairly soon with it. And I'll look over the list and maybe we can come up with a way to release the majority of the information. I would like to get it as public as possible, as quickly as possible. So, is that Catherine?
Yeah, I appreciate Justin's question and Phil's question. I honestly don't see any harm in issuing that list. I was on the land assessment committee as well. I don't see any real issue because to Justin's point about what if the referendum fails? Well, guess what? We may not be looking at land. We are going to have to look at a whole new scenario. So I don't know. I don't see any risk in sharing that information. I know the public wants to see it, and I think we should share it.
Okay, any other comments before I move on? All right, so that's it for the land subcommittee communications.
So we haven't met, but we've been working on presentations. Board of Finance tomorrow night. Mike, you have that, the presentation to talk about the tax implication, just to walk through how to do it if that goes through tonight. And then we've been working, Erica, which really is involved in this too, is looking at some of the, what's the language? I always forget the name of it, blackout period, what you can send. Is
The blackout period is after the town meeting and referendum have been officially called. There's statutory language, and we also have an ordinance involved in that says you can't expend town funds to advocate in one way or another for any vote before referendum.
What's the name of it though? It's informational. It's
Explanatory text.
Thank you.
We can have
Explanatory text.
explanatory text and what that looks like. What Phil's talking about, yeah.
Yeah, so just, we've been working on those things and just kind of going back and forth. Anne's been kind of chiming in on presentations, and it's kind of a
Yeah.
whole group of people working on it together.
That explanatory text has to go through a legal review, and so, that's another component that's been used.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else for communications? No, okay. I'll just make a note for the committee members. A lot of information has been moving around the last few days to try to get ready for this meeting, and it seems it's possible that I got mixed up on some of the things I emailed out to you guys, and I mixed up the presentation that is being built for the Board of Finance tomorrow night, which we'll all be talking about, with the presentation that would be the video that would go out to the public with the text tool, which we'll also talk about tonight. So if you feel confused, you probably have a right to feel confused. Just hang in tonight and we'll hopefully get through it all and realize there really are two different things. There's what we present to Board of Finance, which should be a mix of all the stuff we talk about tonight and all the stuff we review. And then what we are going to put out as a public tool to allow people to see better how it affects their own property. So they're really two different things, and I crisscrossed them in some of the emails. So hang in. Okay, Finance Subcommittee.
Catherine has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, missed it. Catherine, go ahead.
Just a quick question under communications. Did you guys already talk about another mailer to go out just before referendum?
That's part of the conversation around the explanatory text, trying to figure out what goes out when. Is it one mailer or is it two? And we literally just got, I think, 5 or 6 samples of explanatory text from the attorney yesterday. So trying to look at the timeline and what we have time to do, develop and do before, if it would hit before the blackout date. And then if there's explanatory text, that is all you can provide. Again, highly legal language you have to utilize if you send something out during the blackout date, and that would be attorney approved and town clerk approved as well. So yes.
It's statutory, it's part of the statute that it has to
Okay.
legally review. That is statutory. And it comes from the town clerk's office, and this committee can have input on that, but it has to be lack of a better term, bland, right? What we heard from them is can't use adjectives that would be leaning in one way or the other, or, any of our pros and cons that we would
It
use
just,
before.
it just basically says, here's what the question is,
Yes.
here's when you come to vote on it.
Yes, here's what we did, how we got here, and what the question is, and that is it. And so the problem with Catherine, I think, sending before or after, if we stay on the timeline that we have for ourselves, again, that nothing has been set yet, that has the meeting being called on or about February 27th. So it's February 15th. So what would we put out between February 15th and February 27th? After February 27th, it's very limited in what we can expend town funds to do.
Okay, thank you. Now, you mentioned that it was statutory, so I'm assuming that this is going to be part of what we submit as part of the EDO 49 grant application. Is that right?
No, this is statutory language as far as a selectman initiated referendum, because that's what this
Okay.
referendum would be.
So it has
Um,
nothing to do with the application?
Not the explanatory text, no.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, anything else on communications before we move to finance? Okay, so I'm not sure what sort of pattern you guys have figured, like if you, Ralph, whatever combination, but since you're the head of the finance subcommittee, I think we should figure out how much you want to do in committee report and how much you want to do in new business, which is the updated financial information. I'm not sure how you want to handle that. I'm just pointing out we have it in new business. So, I don't know if you maybe want to do a summary now and then really dig into it in new business, maybe?
Yeah, I think I can get the administrative functions over with first
Okay.
and then defer everything else till the actual new
To
business.
8C there,
If
yeah.
that's acceptable.
I think that's a great idea.
Great. Okay, the administrative function is our expenditures to date. If you all look in your emails, I sent it like 3 minutes ago, if you're not here. If it really went to you, is that great difficulty again with town email?
I have it.
I'm sharing it here.
Amazing, but I know Phil and Erica have it for sure, because the town financial manager sent those emails.
It's on the screen.
So as everyone should have it, but I have hard copy for those here.
I'll take the copy.
No.
So this is the $200,000 budget that we've been operating on that pays for our acting consultant, Scott Pellman, our legal services, our land evaluation contractors, and other expenses of this committee. You will see of the two on the second page. Scroll down, thank you. We have expended $81,815 to date. That's actually billed and paid for. Billed, so you might as well say we spent it, not being an accountant, is an additional $59,866. So between expended and encumbered, we're at about $141,000 used of our $200,000 budget for this project, which is good because we're nearing the end of this phase of the project, leaving us with a balance of $58,297. You'll see in the encumbrance detail all the way at the bottom, some of the big hunks that are not paid yet, but are what will be. And that's a large installment of $22,000 for Colliers plus another $2,000, and then Eagle Environmental, the phase 2 study, which I think Scott's speaking on tonight, an additional $22,000 there, which was anticipated for the evaluation of that property. The title search, $2,000 to the law firm Halloran and Sage, and I believe this 10,000 is just sitting there, except for a small amount that we possibly used, if I'm understanding that correctly. But the balance of it is there for our use.
And that's what I was referring to, that we're working on the draft of the revision of the letter of intent. and
Oh, okay,
potential
so
purchase. That's all part
we're
of that purchase
utilizing,
order. We're starting to dip into that.
okay,
Yep.
okay. Well, not a big dip, so good job. Although I'm sure Bill,
So far, so good.
I'm sure Bill's to come.
Yes.
The last bill is in January, so.
Yeah.
So I think as far as our responsibilities to the community on our budget, we're sound. And I don't think we need a motion to approve, but does anybody have any questions about any of this?
Can I just make,
Awesome. Thank you.
can I make a quick comment that the pizza reimbursement to Bill Stevens, we should probably add for SBC presentations.
Oh, that doesn't just stick out there a little?
I don't want to leave that door open.
Well, the fact there's no pizza tonight, Phil.
Right,
is,
I just don't want you to think that you're
disappointing,
feeding my family, because you're not.
Listen, sometimes it gets really hungry. during the day.
And Mike, the Zoom is actually on there already, we just need to vote on.
Okay.
The rest I'll leave till later, Mike, other than to just say that the finance subcommittee, although we didn't have it met formally, we've been quite busy in evaluating a lot of the costs, and I'm pleased to see that as an entire committee, we're taking a hard look at this so we understand it, can submit it to the Board of Finance and take next steps.
I would agree with that as well. Thank you for that work. Okay, anything for the finance subcommittee from the rest of the committee? All right, so let's move on to old business owners project manager update. Scott?
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, not a lot to report tonight. We did communicate with the environmental consultant last week, and I think there was an earlier email report that went out to the committee. They have installed the additional monitoring wells. Currently, they're seeing groundwater about 10 foot below grade. And when they did the drilling and installed the monitoring wells on site, they in the area, they encountered rock about 18 feet below finished grade. So just for purposes, really didn't encounter any rock at the top. They were out this past Monday and took samples from those monitoring wells. Those are now off to for analysis. We should be receiving that analysis back within the next 7 to 10 days. With the additional work that they've been doing, the two areas that they've been reviewing, they feel are very well confined in defined spaces that they're not seeing anything really that goes beyond that. They don't foresee at this point in time any significant cleanup costs. In essence, what they have told me on a preliminary basis is it's probably enough soil to fill a dumpster and then to go off site. So initial thoughts, waiting for the final testing reports to come through, but the initial thoughts are very positive in their phase 2 work.
All right, and just a little clarity for the committee and anyone listening, there are two areas on the property that were, after the whole property was reviewed, there were two areas that were highlighted as having potential just because of what had been stored there. Very typical of New England. One area was basically like a little dump, which was behind the stone walls at most houses back in, 100 years or more ago. And there was the remnants of like tin cans and things like that. And that's the area where he's talking about the monitoring. And the challenge with containers back in that era is someone that had lead in them as container before we knew what lead, did to the people who were drinking from the container. So that's what this is. That is one of the two areas, and they're just verifying that didn't drift. And the prudent way to resolve that would be if you find it didn't drift, you dig up that little area where all that debris is and get rid of it. And then the other areas where some telephone poles have been stacked and they're testing to see if any of the creosote from the telephone poles soaked into the ground. Same thing, if it does show up in the ground, a small amount of area would be scooped up and hauled away just to make sure there's nothing left. So that's what these two areas are. And it's just part of the due diligence to make sure the land is completely clean. Scott, you have anything else?
No, I mean, I think you've touched base, Mike has requested some information to me, so, I have provided some of the information going back as far as the site evaluation matrices and all that are in Mike's hands. I did, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize. Yeah, there is two other things I did send to Mike. I'm not sure if it got distributed to the committee, but I did send an updated milestone schedule that's, again, tracking everything that you're working on currently, as well as, the potential to get an RFQ, RFP out for OPM services, for my services, as well as I have drafted the architects and construction managers qualifications, requests for qualifications. So those have been sent to Mike for committee review. I believe the milestone schedule anticipates issuing those formally by the middle of next month. So the committee has some time to review those. Again, this is not the proposal requests, just the request for qualifications. With those, then you would review those, shortlist down per state statute down to 4 of what you deem are the most qualified respondents. We would request proposals from those 4, and then you would interview those 4 and make a selection. So again, that is in the works, and that was a key milestone deliverable that was on the schedule that I provided this earlier today.
And I have not sent that out to the committee yet. That's one of the million emails that didn't get forwarded yet.
The committee's gonna have a chance to, obviously have a chance to review the RFQs for OPM services.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yep.
And sorry, this is procedural, but I didn't get Peter's email, and it sounds like he might have sent a bunch of stuff. I'm not getting some emails still.
Well, he sent stuff to me.
Okay, he
And
just said,
then Yeah.
Scott, I apologize. I thought you said you sent something out to the committee, but it might have just been,
No, he sends to me, and so I have forwarded, I think, everything except the land matrix and that one he just said about the milestones, which I think was just today, right?
Correct. Yes, it was early this morning. Again, just continue to update it. And then Mike, I'm sure you're gonna, probably talk about the RFQ P that the town needs to work on in the very near future.
Yes, absolutely.
Which can I say that guy over there should be part of?
I just forwarded Peter's email to you. It looked like it was going to a personal email. I just forwarded it to your town email.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, that's it. It takes
Yeah.
time.
As a Board of Finance member now, Peter, he has that Board of Finance email. Do you want to send it to them?
Okay, you're all set, Scott? Thank you. Okay, any questions for Scott before we move on? All right, let's keep going. On to new business. Item A, funding for Zoom extended capacity.
Yeah,
We
would just say it.
Yeah, so we pay right now for extra capacity on Zoom to be able to handle up to 500 people because of these large presentations we've been doing, to make sure we don't get to the 100 cap and have people get cut off. So basically, we're just looking for a motion to approve up to $100.
That's right. It's that number.
Oh,
I
it's
just
in,
want to do.
oh, you've got the actual number on?
Yeah.
What is that,
53.18.
18, never mind. So can I get a motion to approve $53.18 for extended Zoom capacity?
So
Second.
All right, any discussion on the motion?
This is a one-time fee for the year,
1 month.
1 month.
1 month. Yeah. So we may have to do it again in the future, depending on where we go, but this is just to get us through this next segment.
Yeah, we really did it for the community forum, Justin. That was where that week we went, what if we cross our capacity of 100? And we said, we just need to do it. So,
So the last 2 that we've done, we didn't have that extra capacity.
we may have,
we
eaten it.
may have paid for it on the town side,
Yeah.
not the specific SBC
Yeah.
side.
I just wondering how we did it before compared to what we're doing now, that's all.
We did
Someone
the
else
same
paid
thing.
for it for us.
Right.
So we didn't cut people off and so we could act quickly to get it
So we have the
approved.
same capability, Justin, that last time, or this time around, I think Phil and I said, this is really an SBC cost. So, so in order to have that license all the time, it requires the town to have, I think, a minimum of 10 licenses. and the amount was extraordinary.
Yeah.
So. we paid-
So we're buying it à la carte right now.
Yes.
Any other discussion on the motion?
So we didn't come anywhere near it, but we were.
All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Mike, Mike, I had my hand up. I just wanted, could you remind us what it was and what it is now for $53 a month?
So the Zoom, normally the Zoom has a capacity of 100 people to join it.
Yeah,
And because of the public forums, we wanted to make sure we could go up to the 500. That's the next step from 101 to 500. And so to act quickly for the last forum, the town paid the extra for the capacity, but we're trying to pay for it out of our budget because that's the right thing to do. So
okay.
it's
And the
just to pay
previous,
that 101 to 500.
so thank you. And that previous, the previous ones where we went over, you said the town paid for that. My question is,
Yeah, we have the extended capacity already.
so after the referendum, are we gonna go back to the 100, or is this gonna be a cost per month for the duration of?
It's only good for a month, Catherine. So it's only good for 30 days. Everything you pay another $50. So if we had a meeting where we needed it, we would.
We'll
upgrade
address it going forward
Month to month?
as needed.
Okay,
Yeah.
that was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, you can't buy it any other way, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I saw a whole bunch of ayes. Do we have any nays or abstentions?
I didn't vote, so I'll say.
I don't think you called it for a vote, Mike.
Okay, what was that, Catherine?
Oh, I didn't vote, so I'm just gonna say aye.
Thank you. Okay. So far, we've seen all ayes. Do we have any nays or abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. All right, next item is the appraisal. As everybody knows, we had to have an appraisal initially to have a conversation with the landowner. That appraisal needs to be updated because it was from August 22nd of 22, I believe. And because they have to be within a certain age when we go to the state, if there's a positive referendum, we have to re-up that appraisal and we have to have a second appraisal. So I talked to the original appraiser and they gave me a proposal for $1,250 to update their appraisal. It was $3,000 for the original. So $1,250 updates it. And then I had a very hard time getting another appraiser, and then I got one, and then I lost him yesterday morning, and then got another one yesterday afternoon, fortunately. And so we have a proposal for $3,000 for a second appraisal, which I was pleased to see is the same price as the first one last year. I expected it to go up. So first, I would like to get a motion to approve $1,250 to update the previous appraisal from Haggerty.
So moved.
In a second, please.
I'll second.
All right, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Okay, motion carries. And then I'd like, I'm asking for a motion to approve $3,000 for a second appraisal of the property by the firm of CBRE.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
All right, any discussion on the motion?
Because this came in, and I haven't seen it much before, this is the scope of this appraisal is matches.
I reviewed it and I asked them to, because the previous appraisal had been released publicly, I sent them the previous appraisal and I told them to match the methodology up also, which they have assured me they've matched up the methodology.
Okay, thank you.
And they are an experienced commercial firm too, so they're certified and licensed for the commercial appraisal, which is what all of the appraisers I talked to said we have to do for this particular exercise. So they have the right qualifications also. Any other questions, Catherine?
I just had a question about, you mentioned the first appraisal had to be within a certain time frame of our application. I just want to ensure that these two are within that time frame because you didn't share that. So what is that time frame, and can we be assured that we're not going to have to go through this again?
Scott, do you want to give the exact?
Yeah, the time frame is the state, when you're applying for a grant, they want the appraisals to be within 6 months of your grant application. So you're well within that window.
So that was our goal. I've asked both of these vendors to have it back to us by March 14th, because that means we would have those numbers by the time of the town meeting. And I figure it's good information to be sharing with the public by the time we get to town meeting. They have both said they can have the numbers to us by March 14th. And that means the appraisals will be 3 months old when we submit the application, if we have a positive referendum.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we should be all done. We voted on both of those, right? Oh, that was still discussion. That's right. Okay. Any more discussion on the second motion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions or nays? Seeing none, motion passes. Thank you. Okay, updated financial information and tax impact tool. As I said before, I sent out a lot of stuff by email. I may have mixed up. We have potentially 3 different presentations or yeah, we'll call them presentations for the moment. Very lengthy, detailed work done by the finance subcommittee. More work that Phil and Scott and Erica and Donna and I had contributed to in the meantime. We had started before the subcommittee got going on theirs, which is a smaller, less detailed report, and then also a proposed tool to put out to the public, which is basically a video presentation that Phil recorded with just a few slides, and it explains the process on screen of how taxpayers can go to the town's website. There'll be live links on the website. They'll be able to click right on it, go to the property database, get their assessment, and then they can actually punch it right in to the tool. And it's a spreadsheet with all of the formulas locked in the spreadsheet. And there's just one box they can punch in the assessment they got for their property. And it will show the 4 different, it'll show the tax effect for their property of the 4 different scenarios. So these are the 3 different pieces of information we're talking about tonight. I think probably we should let you guys start with the work you guys did and go over that stuff. And then we can roll it into the rest of the conversation. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
Okay,
I was just one thing before we do that.
sure.
The first thing you sent out, Mike, which was the project costs. I'm assuming that was prepared so we have something definitive on the motions we made as a committee for a new school and a new school and auditorium. Is that correct?
Well, it was really.
There's 2 things here. There's the actual what we're spending
Right.
regardless of the town's cost. And that's going to be on the referendum. So it's
Right.
important that that information is accurate.
Right, so the information you're looking at right there on your screen, which was the costing basis, that's a tool used by Colliers to essentially
I gather that.
create what they believe the project cost would be based on whatever factors are included in there. And that's how they kind of cost out the project itself.
Understood.
And then, of course, you'll see, like, I think there's lines in there for contingencies, and then things get added on. The cost of financing gets added on.
Fully
and all
understand
Yeah.
that. What I want to be sure of is that we're not changing the numbers that are set for referendum that we voted on, regardless of what these.
No, this is old information. This is information that built those numbers
That's what I
previously.
thought. That's
Yeah.
what I thought.
It's just newly getting
But
shared.
it certainly supports the numbers that we voted on.
Right, and it's getting shared because it was requested by a couple of the committee members that they see the costing process that was behind creating that project.
Okay, and this information where is this gonna be located if someone wants to understand better what's behind the referendum costs for both?
Well, at this point, it's committee information. It's not, I mean, anything in the committee is FOIable and is public, but it's committee information for our deliberations.
So right now, it's just internal to us.
Right, just so that because committee members ask, how was this created? I'm not saying we can't share it. I'm just saying that's where it is at this moment.
Okay, that,
Can I just share one piece? Peter, I know you're talking about, so this committee voted on a project that had a project cost to it. The number that the Board of Selectmen used in their motion that moved forward to Board of Finance. I just want to make sure this committee understands why that number is going to look different than the 60 million and change of the project. It's an additional $2 million because if the town chooses to capitalize on the interest into the bond, it would be part of the appropriation, the initial appropriation. Doesn't mean we have to, but it means you could roll the notes, pay the cost of the notes into the bond, which some municipalities do. And that was in discussions with that, our business manager, myself, and our bond counsel, when we were discussing that, that is an option the town has, but only if you have asked for that as part of your appropriation. So we had a plan set forth to put that in CIP, and that could stay that way, or it could be rolled into the bond. But you cannot do that if you did not have an appropriation. So the amount that went was 62 million, and I apologize, I don't remember that.
I don't even-
It's in the presentation, but I want to make sure this committee understands why that number that the Board of Selectmen are using is not your project cost. So it does not mean that is the
no,
path we're
I'm
going
fine,
to
fine
do.
with that.
Yeah,
I'm
I just
fine
want to
with
make
that.
sure we understand.
And Ralph will address that. The only other thing I wanted to say is we've all spent a lot of time trying to understand these costs, which I think is really important. And I would just ask you all for a moment to put yourselves in the places of residents. If it's difficult for us, how confusing is this for the average resident of Willington to understand? I would venture to say everyone's fairly confused right now. And the sooner we can make this as simple and understandable as possible, the better. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Ralph.
Can I ask one quick question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
We just spoke about it. Are we gonna have an opportunity to talk about these project costs breakdown? I'm only thinking, like, later in this meeting. Or is this, I guess my point looking ahead at tomorrow's meeting, it's information that, as a Board of Finance representative, I'm curious about. I have this right.
Good point. Good point.
But, I don't think this is shareable in any way, shape or form, publicly. Just because there's too many unknowns and just the formatting and there's a lot of descriptors, but I do think it's important to get that information in some summary, large, big picture bullet format. We don't need this level of detail even, but just like
So,
hard cost assumptions, and I know I've spoken to you, emailed you about.
so perhaps the best way for us to handle that would be similar to the other thing we talked about is if board members have some comments on how to make this easier to present, email them to me. We can't have board discussion in email, but you can email thoughts or ideas to me directly, one-on-one. And we'll see if we can come up with, we'll have some ideas together, either for our next meeting or whatever, if we have to call a special meeting or whatever, to make sure we've got all this information out there. I'm not against that idea at all. I just think we're not in a position to deal with it right at this exact moment.
I think it's helpful. I also think it would be helpful for the Board of Finance as they honestly make that decision or have this presentation tomorrow and or the joint meeting on the 27th. I think some backup of support is important because honestly, look, I have no questions with most of the assumptions and, in this as presented, other than some of the differences, that bond cost was a good one. It explained where we were getting, but I just think it's important that we have a sound justification that the project we're approving is embedded appropriately.
I think that's appropriate, and I think we have to balance that also with, I think that's part of the reason you're here representing the Board of Finance, right? And part of the reason you were selected because you have this skill set. So So that's also part of what we do when we report between committees or report to the town. There has to also be a certain amount of understanding that this committee did its work. So, you know, so we could say something as simple of, we hired an excellent consultant, the consultant said everything's good. We're obviously not gonna go to that. We're not gonna go to making comments like that. We're gonna give much more detail than that. But we just have to see what amount of detail we can manage between, like, now and tomorrow night. You know, we may not, like, you can look at it and say, as someone who works in the field, the costing process seems reasonable or doesn't seem reasonable, and you can make that comment, and we have some belief in your expertise. And the Board of Finance hopefully will have some belief in the work we've done here too.
Mike, if you recall, if I may, back in early December, I did provide, again, trying to meet the level of detail, you know, to help the committee along without, you know, taking it too far down the road. I did provide a summary of the costs that were broken into 6 different buckets of money of how the overall project budget. I'd be happy to send that to you again,
I
if
have
that
it.
would be a benefit.
I have it handy, and I did send it out to the committee.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying, right?
I do now. Ralph?
Mike, I had a question for Erica with what she was putting on the table before about the bond question. When I look at Munistat's output, two of the footnotes speak to the issuance of notes and the issuance of bonds. Those have to be in the town budget the year they're issued. So what I'm hearing, and I'm not sure it's correct, that's why I'm talking now. Are we looking to pay off the interest on the notes by using the bond, which in essence is paying interest on interest? And I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that, but if that's the way it is, that's the way it is. So I need some clarity on that.
So Ralph, if I can, if this isn't saying we're going to do that, it allows the appropriation. Without it, there can be no discussion, and it won't be this committee that decides that. And it was under the advice of our business manager that we have that option. It's already been discussed at CIP as we may be uncomfortable with, you know, the thought of paying interest on interest, but it cannot be done unless the appropriation is made. So it does not mean that will be the final decision. We could keep this in CIP the way we have it, which will have those funds paid off in the years outlined from that you got from the Munistat. But the advice we had was to include those dollars to be able to capitalize on that, whether or not.
All right, I understand as far as the question on the referendum. I get that. Now, how about the cost of issuance of the notes and the bond? Are those going to be paid in the fiscal year that they're issued?
We can't.
lost
hear you.
I can't hear you.
To be determined? No,
Can't hear.
Can you hear me?
barely.
Yeah.
Maybe the owl fell asleep.
Wake up the owl.
How about now?
Just a little bit better.
So just so you guys know, everything's fine. Just, yeah, there you go. Kristen, just keep giving us thumbs up. It's all
Trust
fine.
me.
Yeah.
How about now?
That's all.
All right, that seems good. I mean, it hadn't been moving when Erica was talking. That's why I was.
We didn't move, so I unmuted. So Ralph, that hasn't been determined. That is possible. Is that the smartest thing to do? No, I don't know that it is, right?
Okay.
But it, and then we've asked this question, we've looked at some other things. Again, these are Willington's decisions to make. I will tell you.
Understood.
We lost
can't-
you again.
Lost you again.
So but you can see that other municipalities have done it and others have not. So it's going to be a municipality decision.
Ms. Harris?
Just as an observer, it has to do with, unfortunately, when Ralph speaks, it sets off your mic or something in your room and
Yeah.
lowers your volume. I don't know why. It's
I
always
agree, but
happening.
Ralph's really loud.
It's-
Well,
So it's going to be up to the town to determine that, Ralph, and I think there's going to be a lot of discussion as to whether or not we do that, and so it is not set in stone that that is the way in which we will bond.
Who makes that decision though? Is it the Board of Finance or the subcommittee? Or is it?
The language is the first selectman and the treasurer, but I have no doubt there will be a much broader conversation. Multiple parties will weigh in on that,
I just,
yeah.
Yeah, gets to it.
I didn't think it was
Right.
us. That was my point.
Right.
It's not up to us as a
It's
committee.
not,
no, we're not the Board of Finance.
but, and it's not a done deal by any stretch, it's just making sure if the town chooses to go in that direction, that the ability is there. And that, again, recommended by our business manager.
All right, let's move on to,
Before we do,
let's not move on to,
I just want to come back to Jim's point because it's an important one. Would it be possible, Scott, can you hear me? To take the project budget and simplify it? I think that's what James was suggesting, so that it's available to the Board of Finance on Thursday night. And they have a better grasp.
I think, well, that's what Scott was saying was in the other thing with the
That
6
was in the other
buckets,
thing?
right? Scott?
Yeah.
We have it, okay.
It was an email, I just found it. It doesn't give totals, but it gives a methodology for how the spreadsheet that.
Right. That's the methodology that
Oh,
created this
no,
spreadsheet.
I had something else in mind. I had a simplified version of this, fewer larger subgroups perhaps. So the Board of Finance can understand it, and then more importantly, so the townspeople can understand it at town meetings. We keep acting like, you know, we're serving the masters of bond councils and financiers, and we keep forgetting it's the townspeople that will decide this issue. So I'd like some clarity for the Board of Finance so they can explain it to our townspeople.
Okay, I gotta make one comment. We're not dismissing that we're serving the townspeople. We are not hung up on serving the financiers, as you keep saying. I agree that we have to follow their language. Those are legal requirements. We have no choice. We are all working every day. You see it in my emails that we're trying to find more and more transparency. So let's get to a little more focused conversation about that transparency.
I agree.
Let's talk about the numbers. I will, Scott, if you don't mind, I'll email you in the morning and see if we can come up with a quick shortened version of this.
Yeah, I mean, if you and the committee can, you know, give me a little direction onto the extent in what you're looking for, I'm happy to, you know, put something together. So, yeah, I think a little extra guidance and I'm happy to work on something.
Yes.
Okay, I'll email you in the morning and see if we can come up with a simpler version that captures that information in time for tomorrow night.
So again, I'm the one I prompted a lot of that and I've been pushing for it. Yes, I think it's valuable. If it doesn't happen for tomorrow, I think it would be beneficial to happen before the 27th where the ultimate vote happens, so that at least that information
Sure.
is available. Again, the Board of Finance hasn't seen any of this, so they haven't even really officially been introduced to the project, which will happen tomorrow night, you know.
Right.
They're aware of it, but they haven't. So, you know, I'm all for getting as much information out there. If something simple as possible that isn't going to be more confusing, that would be helpful. Top line, you know, here's baseline budget, here's what we're assuming for soft costs, here's what we're assuming for FF&E fit out and IT, you know, there's.
Why?
What is escalation?
I gotta ask you why. Are they gonna have expertise in that?
Yeah, that kind of goes back to my comment about this is what we're supposed to be
Right.
doing.
And that's fair. I guess what I would, so I'm trying to look at this, I do have an understanding of this and, you know, where this goes, and I don't honestly have much of a problem with the metrics used. I think it would be helpful just to be able to say and have reasonable support to anybody who wants to look into it, that there is, it has been vetted, you know, that there is a degree of reality into this, and that, you know, that's 60, whichever 69 metric.
All right, so I'm gonna finish this. I'm gonna cut off this leg of the conversation because we're beating this horse. This is, I'm gonna give you the same answer I gave you in email also. It's important to balance all of this detail with getting our job done and also not overburdening Scott's billable hours, and also having a certain amount of trust that the 2 years of work that this committee's doing and the consultant we're paying has a certain amount of value. So we can only get so granular because then we run out of time to get into the granulars. So the financials, the cost, I think the priority has to be on the cost of the taxpayers, and we certainly want to back it up as much as we can.
Yeah, it's
But
not
there's a
granular.
certain amount of trust that has to be in the 10 people on this committee too.
Oh, I
It's
get
part of
that.
the reason you're on the committee.
I trust this number. I just think saying something more than just a top line dollar ask is not asking for being too grand.
Pretty reasonable. Yes. Okay,
Like
so,
that's
so
all
we
I'm trying
beat
to
this
get at.
horse. We beat this horse, Catherine.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm not missing something. You're not intending to be sharing something on the screen, right?
I am.
No.
You, for what? For which, for this question we're debating right now?
Yeah, exactly.
No, not for this.
Okay, so we're not, so the item that we're talking about is the information you sent us in an email. It's called the Willington SBC presentation to Board of Finance.
Just hang in. You're gonna see, they're gonna put theirs up first. I may have confused you with what I sent in emails.
That's the item. That's fine.
So.
Yeah,
there-
I'm just trying to
as I
figure
said a
out
couple
what,
minutes ago, there's 3 presentations. We're gonna talk about all 3 of them.
She's asking if that's the item we're on, Mike, and we just kind of
Right.
weird.
It's all in this item, yes. And what Peter was asking about is some of the cost, the financial stuff in the background that built the project cost.
okay.
Does that kind of answer your question?
I think so. I'm just, I'm trying to follow along and participate, but I'm not really sure what we're talking about. If it has anything to do with what you sent us and the estimated tax impact tool, I do have
We're
comments
about
about
to get
that.
there. We're about to get there.
All right, perfect. All right, I'll hold on to my comments then.
Okay.
I've spoken enough about this tonight for my needs ahead of tomorrow. Sorry.
Okay. Now you ready to go?
All set.
Okay, awesome.
Who's going first here?
You're also on that, right?
Think you're up, Ralph.
You're up, Ralph.
All right, I need to share my screen. Let me see here.
Ralph, can you turn that microphone down anyway? It's so loud.
I can't. I'm sorry. I've tried.
Cover it with a hat.
Can he step back?
He's sitting at a desk.
It's on my headset, so I don't have any control over it.
You should be able to click the little speaker on the bottom of your screen and turn it down.
Yeah, it's his microphone, I think, that's getting us.
Need a better view angle. Go watch the text.
Okay, if I talk a little quieter, is this okay?
Slightly.
Slightly. I don't know why it's so loud. Okay, I'm just going to roll through this quickly. What I developed was from the point of view of the average person who has minimal understanding of taxes and how this impacts them. So I'm just going to roll through it. You can interrupt me at any time here if you want. It's just a series of bullets of what we've done. We have our ed spec. We talk about the excess square foot. OSCGR's acknowledgement that the guidelines don't quite work. The fact that we will not know the space waiver, we won't know if we're getting it until after we submit an application. And because of that and other circumstances, we're not going to peg an exact cost until we know what our grant's going to be. So these are numbers that I had. They may need to be corrected. Okay. And I go on and talk about total construction cost, the taxpayer's share, as we know it today. And the two numbers that I put up there are based on our expected space waiver. And the cost if we don't get a space waiver. Regardless of whether or not we get the waiver, the duration is going to be about the same. Then we have the overall financing, the short-term notes. And this may vary based on what Erica was talking about earlier. And then once the project is done, it all gets rolled into a 20-year bond. And the cost associated with the bond. So I've looked at, I have a spreadsheet that I'll show next. The Munistat prepared, I think, a total now of 12 different scenarios. 4 of them really apply. The key ones, new school without an auditorium, but with a space waiver, new school with an auditorium and a space waiver, new school without an auditorium and without a space waiver. And okay, I get into a lot of the scenarios that Munistat had given us. One was called level principal, the other level debt service. So this is level principal. We're basically paying the same amount on the principal every year. The interest declines over time because we're paying interest on the unpaid balance. Level debt service, the interest is kind of pre-calculated and divided over 20 years, equal payments each year. And while I've analyzed this one, that's not what I'm going to present tonight. I've actually analyzed all of the possible permutations. And then we go into the advantages, disadvantages. Level principals are a tough hit up front, but payments decline over time. Level debt, annual payments are about the same, although we are paying a lot more interest in level debt service. But initially, those payments don't have such an impact on the mill rate. Who's going to decide this? We're not going to. This is pretty much intended for the general public, but I would also present this to the Board of Finance. This gets into the details of the how my spreadsheet works. So that's that issue. Now I got to figure out how to get out of here. Okay. Any comments or questions so far?
I'm ready to see the spreadsheets. I mean, you sent this to me already, so I've looked at it already. I don't know if other people have questions.
Quick comment.
You,
Is this going to,
you're not supposed to comment right now, but right now, the public is seeing this on
I'm
screen.
gonna forget it if I don't say it. Is this going to the meeting tomorrow night?
That hasn't been decided.
Because if it is, it went by too quick. And space waiver needs to be defined.
Carry on, Ralph.
All right, let me get to my other. Oops. Okay, Mike, just so you know, this parallels your presentation as far as options. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. 1A is with an auditorium, but what I'm showing here, and I can vary any variable in here. Right now, the default government growth is 2.5%. If I change that to say default 4%, all the numbers recalculate
Right.
throughout the sheet. I'm waiting for an updated grand list number because that will change everything on here. One of the things that I've done, the red column is the debt service over time. Included in that are the cost of issuance of the bonds and any existing debt service. So that's all rolled into this. And then this column is the mill rate, calculated based on the current grand list number that's in here. And what it would take to cover that debt service plus the revenue needed before debt service, which is the total budget, I presume. And each year it increments up 2.5%. So we can see new school without a waiver. Pick a year. 2032. This would calculate a mill rate of about 46.64. If for 100K assessment, you're looking at property tax of about 4,664 compared to 3,166 now. If I go to option 2, which is new school without the auditorium, no waivers. Let's see if I can pick the same year. We're seeing a slightly different mill rate and total tax due on 100,000 assessment. And we have this one. This is your third, Mike. New school with an auditorium with a waiver. I'll go back and pick 2032. It's basically, I think, the sequence is decreasing cost to the town. So we're down to 100,000 assessment. We're down to 4,487. And then the final one is a new school without an auditorium or with a waiver. And you can see that the mill rates are still up in the 40s, but slightly less with the tax payment on 100,000 at 43.65.
Ralph, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So you pointed out that you had factored in an assumption of a 2.5% annual growth in the expense budget, right?
Correct. You can modify it year by year, Mike.
That's on the screen right now. Do you have an assumption in for revenue and grand list and things like that?
Okay, there is
changes.
Okay, changes in reval really doesn't affect this.
Yeah, that's why I didn't say reval.
Okay, an expansion of the grand list will affect this, but I couldn't figure out how to write the formulas because it depends which year you get that bump.
And we don't know, we would have to guess anyway.
Correct. What I can do is if there's another bond, say for the fire department, I could put it in this column and it will adjust all the numbers all the way across.
Right. So the challenge is predicting the things we can't predict, including revenue.
Exactly. One thing I do have is you want to see the mill rate comparison of the 4 options and where it goes over 20 years. We have that. The bumps here are because of the cost of notes and the cost of issuing the bond. And I suspect the bump at this end, the change in the slope of the curve, is because of payoff amounts that Munistat calculated, the 20-year payment.
So I think one of the challenges we've had so far with information that's gone out to the public is this exact same thing, is trying to figure out how to show the public the cost of the project mixed in with what we think the typical government budget will do, which is a challenge, right? We're assuming growth of 2.5%. That seems like a reasonable number to use as an example. It's not a guarantee by any means. But then we aren't putting the rest of the pieces of the puzzle in because we don't know how to assume them or predict them. So I think one of the things, it's created sort of a false narrative among some people, because as Peter said, this is difficult to understand. It's created sort of a false narrative that when people see a mill rate of 47 or whatever, they think that's what this project is doing to their taxes. And it's really this project plus any other growth in town, not balanced by growth in revenue and not balanced by changes in the grand list, which is creating, accidentally, is creating a false impression that the school itself, the school project, is going to make their mill rate 46 or 51 or whatever the various numbers are. And so I think that's a challenge for us to figure out how to be honest with the taxpayers about where this could be going, but also separate out what is the actual cost of the school itself? What does this bond alone mean for their taxes?
Okay, I get that. So if I reduce the annual spending increase to 0 and go back to the graph, this is just due to the school.
Right. So that's a very different picture, as long as we can explain to the townspeople what the difference is. This is the actual cost of the school project, the bonding to pay for the school. But it isn't necessarily where their taxes overall will end up. We don't know where their taxes overall will end up because we don't know revenue, grand list, and expense. That's the challenge for us, to try to figure out how to paint that picture.
Well, let me make one point here. This is not intended, this spreadsheet as a whole is not intended for the public. This is more intended as a tool for both this committee and the Board of Finance. If you want to model some what ifs, that's what this tool is intended to be able to do.
Right. All right. I had a question from Erica. I was holding her off on.
Thank you. So Ralph, I know the information that you were looking at that was prepared by Munistat for us showed our existing debt, but that's already included in our current budget number. So that's already included in our budget. So unless you subtracted that dollar amount from the overall budget, you've got it in here twice. Right?
For one year, for one fiscal year, yes.
But you'd have to take it out each year because it's incrementally going down, right? So this year it's 177, so it's already in that $14 million amount.
That's fine.
And that would, then I would argue the next year it's included in there because we're looking at 171,000. So I think the existing debt you need to take out of your equation. And in addition to the starting, revenue needed, it's included in that revenue needed number.
It is for the beginning year, I would agree. But, all right, so the 2.5 would be applied to the amount that was in the previous year.
Correct.
So, all right, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
School you'd include, but that existing debt, which goes through, 6/30/27, you would need to subtract from your red column, in my opinion.
Okay, that's easy enough to do. There is a debt service spreadsheet that's tied in with this. I can make that adjustment there. And the numbers would accurately reflect exactly what you're saying. The only thing that's not predictable is how much is the budget going to grow each year. We don't know. We really don't know. We can't predict for 2027 what our budget's going to be.
Right. For example, the budget has had variations in growth over the last few years, but our mill rate has not necessarily reflected that because we've had we've had higher than expected levels of revenue. And we've also varied the amount of money taken out of reserves, out of the fund and put back into the budget to balance expense. So when you add all these complications in, it makes it very hard to predict the budget, the base budget out.
Understood.
I
I've also added this provision to take a particular year. If we know we're going to pull from capital reserves, we can plug that number in here and see what the impact is.
Which would be awesome if we could predict that. I mean, that would be great.
I know.
20 years from now, keep that for 20 years, and then let's go fill these numbers in and see how we did it.
Could be sooner than 20 years.
It's all in trying. I was just trying to come up with a tool that did our best guess. It's a guesstimate. It's not. It's. I don't have a crystal ball. No one does.
Right.
But I wanted something that would run the numbers out into the future, so
Right.
we could see what's happening.
All right, hang on. We got a question in the room here.
Okay, go ahead.
No, just a comment. No, so what's helpful, most helpful for this and what I've been struggling with, which is why I pushed for it, was identifying what the actual cost impact of the project itself is. Mike, you phrased it all wonderfully earlier and you've said that, but it is hypothetical what's going to happen in the future. In 2007, our mill rate was 26. It's 31 now. That's 16 years. You know, I look at this with a 2.5% increase showing a mill rate going up to 56. Sure, maybe it'll happen. There are other mitigating factors that we can't predict for. What's important is to understand that the cost impact specific to this project. Which, waiver, not waiver, I think this is a wonderful tool, which is great. But also because there's been a lot of conversation, this is helpful as well, because this is how you see a bond payment schedule, you know, it's reflective of what you typically see in a bond repayment schedule for a level principal scenario, where you get a peak at the front, but the actual impact of that bond as you're paying down the principal lessens over time. It's the same thing with, you know, you're more.
So I applied, trying to figure out what we're presenting and how to voice it to the taxpayers. I applied my own house assessment to this. And when I plug, my current taxes are about $7,500 a year. I applied this and on the worst case scenario, so it would be the highest impact on my taxes. Auditorium and no waiver. I applied it, and what my maximum impact was just over $2,000. So it's essentially almost a 30% change, which is a significant number and is a number we need to be defining and sharing with people, but it's not what some people were worried about. Some of our numbers had misled people to thinking there's a 60% change in their taxes.
It's also not increasing year over year. It's actually
right.
Level.
So mine went up. The impact on my own taxes went up to a peak at the third year out. It was at $2,000, maybe $400 difference. And from there on, it went down, similar to the graph that we just saw. So I think getting to that, as you said, is important. Ralph or Peter, if you guys wouldn't mind looking at the version that Phil and I put together now, I think it does a lot of the same thing, but maybe in a simplified format, and we could kind of talk about what makes sense.
Sure. I just want to make a comment
please,
before we do that.
please.
I agree, and trying to anticipate every contingency that could happen over the next 20 years that we pay for this new school and the bond schedule is difficult. What is important is that we clearly identify our cost for this project.
Mm-hmm.
And once we do that, and that means all of our costs. Mike, your scenario, you might see it, leaves out the construction cost and bonding costs. And I know that's put in a different bucket in the town's budget, but it's still a real cost that we can.
I don't think we left that out. Did we?
Okay, try it there. I'm not sure. I've looked at so many different slides that.
Yeah, so when we get to that, let's talk about that. But let's bring that up.
I'm just using an example of the importance of expressing. One of the things we heard in the Hall School Gymnasium was the correct perception of the town and it's amazing to me how people always get it right, that they were not seeing all the costs. And I think that was concerning to them. So as long as we can define all of the costs for this project, I'm quite confident Jim and the board, James? I apologize. Jim and the Board of Finance can play around with, is it a 2.5% increase in the town's budget that we add in? Does the firehouse hit us in year 5, right after your increase?
Starts to come down.
You might see a bigger increase the following year if we get a new emergency services complex on top of this new school. So if we can at least do one thing, provide the Board of Finance what our true cost for this project, and not for 6 years, but for 20 years.
Yeah, I don't
Run
think
it out.
there's any, I don't
Run
think
it
there's any
out.
question.
Because
Yep.
everybody wants to know what that is. What is the mill rate now? 31.2 something? And what is it at the end of that 20-year period? 58 point something.
That's not what the mill rate would be
Right.
based upon just this project.
Yeah, it would,
Look forward to a lower number, Phil.
it's gonna be 41 something.
Can you just plug 0 into this, Ralph? Worst case scenario even?
He did already. That's how we got the lower graph.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So.
So
Now look at the mill rate 20 years out. Let's bond year 20 in this scenario.
What is zero growth?
35, it's back down to
35.
0 growth.
35, right.
That's the cost of this project, which is fine. There are any other costs.
I think
as
the
well.
third year is maybe the peak, and it's like the worst one is like 42 or something like that. I can't read them all from here.
And this, yeah, this is the worst. We have with auditorium without waiver here. So this is.
Yeah, and what's that peak mill rate here?
Which scenario do you want?
Worst
This
case,
is
auditorium, no
fine.
waiver.
40.88.
Oh, okay, that's this one. That's the worst case.
So what's the peak mill rate? I can't read it clearly from here.
40.88.
40.88. Okay, so I thought.
Yeah, 40.88. That's the first year of the bond.
So it's a less than 10 mil increase at the peak.
Worst case scenario
Worst case scenario.
for
right?
this project.
If the
Right.
government budget doesn't grow at all.
Well, we're talking about this project, so we don't confuse the information, right? Yep. Okay, so,
But what's important to me as a taxpayer is what am I going to have to pay in 2027?
of course, yes, of course.
Okay.
We're all worried about that,
Can't tell you that.
right?
I'd like to make one last point, Mike, if I may. I was hopeful that after we voted on the 2 projects, that there'd be some simplicity and hopefully clarity for the townspeople. But I find that introducing the waiver confuses people because it creates so many more multiples of this.
Yep.
And given the fact that we are voting in referendum on the worst case scenario, it does not make sense to me. And that's a good thing that happens potentially if this project is approved by the townspeople. But because we're voting on not getting a waiver, that I would emphasize that less is the way I'll put it. To make the presentation to both the Board of Finance should fully understand the waiver, but for the townspeople, they need to be clear. We're not voting on options that include waivers. We don't have that.
We're voting on the worst case scenario.
Correct, and I think everyone is
We're
utterly.
voting on a total project cost.
Yes.
That's what we're voting on.
Well, we're voting on 2 separate questions.
But it's a
they
total
go
project
together.
Yes, yes,
I
that's
agree.
true. It's right. It's the total project cost. And
Yeah, you're right.
that's the key for the town meeting to explain that difference.
And there'll be no option to vote on anything with a waiver, and that only happens if the
Right.
state in its
Right,
infinite wisdom decides
Correct.
to give us one after we voted.
correct. Yes.
But we're looking at all those different scenarios now, and I think that is very confusing to townspeople.
I agree, but
Maybe confusing to
sometimes,
Board of Finance.
a decision this big is confusing, unfortunately. So we got to work as much as we can, and the Board of Finance has to work as much as they can to present that in the least complicated way, right?
Agreed, go.
Okay.
All right, so Ralph, Phil's gonna put up.
Anna has a question.
Oh, sorry.
Hi. I think it's really important that we educate our voters about the waiver so they realize that it's a possibility. So I'll leave it at that, but I think it's important that they're aware that that's a possibility rather than thinking that the highest price is the price that it will cost. Thank you.
Anybody else from the committee online who's not in the room here? I know it's a little harder for you guys to participate. Especially when we're in the screen share like this, because I don't see all your tiles.
There you go, Mike.
Okay. All right, so anyone else while we, before we switch over? Catherine, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think Ralph did a good job at explaining most of that chart, because I think that's where most of my questions were. But just in general, is this the kind of detail, the level of detail that you were showing in the chart? Is that what the Board of Finance is expecting from us?
Well, why don't you see what our other two things are here and let's talk about that. I think the Board of Finance, my impression from talking with Stephanie is they want as much information as possible about the fiscal stuff so that they can make a good discussion and a good, when they make their vote to move things forward, they know all the details. So I would say they may want that level of granularity. It's really a matter of which things, do certain things create too much speculation maybe, or whatever. So let's see this other.
Okay, I have a couple other questions. The 2.5%, I saw that when he turned it to 0, it actually showed the impact of, I think it was the mill rate that you were showing in the graph. So that 2.5%, is that what the estimate is of? Is that just a normal governmental increase every year, no matter what?
That is a WAG. That is a WAG for an average annual. You know what the WAG is, I hope.
Yeah.
I've been watching other towns and I'm seeing other towns' budgets going up 5 to 7% overall.
Okay. So but that 2.5% doesn't represent just the school project, right?
No, that's actually separate from the school project. That was a placeholder for the general government growth.
I see.
Correct.
Okay.
But again, it wasn't balanced by revenue or grand list changes or any of that other stuff, because there's so many unknowns.
Okay, and I think you answered this next question, but just tell me if you did or didn't.
Okay.
How will the info change over the years when other town bonds will be paid off? I think I saw some information on the left where it looked like there was a note that was going to be closed or a bond that was going to be closed.
So,
Is
right,
that figured
that's what
into
Erica
it?
brought up, Catherine, that's what Erica brought up, that we have to, as other things get paid off, they actually reduce the expense load on the town budget.
Right,
But you can predict that because those, like that bond for the library, we know what the payments will be and when it'll end. But
Right.
what we don't know is what other things will happen in the budget.
Gotcha.
So like Erica's suggestion was to make sure we don't sort of double count it. And that's like everything, like we can't factor in, we're paying for dump trucks and ambulances and all that. We can't factor all those loans into this conversation. That's all part of that general budget, which really is, that's probably a conversation the Board of Finance might have tomorrow night. Like, how do we look at this landscape across all of our debt service?
well, I saw that Ralph had a couple in there, so I was just curious what that represented. Was that representative of just those few and that there's a dozen more, or and I guess we have to decide what do we show? Do we show what we know, or do we don't show anything and just make a note that it could be impacted?
Right, so that's what hopefully in this next presentation, you'll see a slightly boiled down version, which hopefully gives us some food for new thought here.
Okay, thank you. That was it.
So this is Ralph's version off steroids. Ralph's version is on steroids. Which is,
Looks about
you
the
know,
same, Phil.
it does, but I'm going to tell you that in Ralph's version, he had lots of columns. We actually hid columns in this. And one of the things that I think Mike has hit upon here was trying to come up with a methodology to share with the public the cost of just this project. Because like Ralph said, we can't predict the future. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know where the town budget's going to go. So we simplified the assumptions, and this is different. Let's see if I can make this bigger for you. Sorry. We simplified the assumptions to say the grand list is flat. This does not include any operational decrease in the Board of Education budget. It maintains the collection rate at 99%. And it is the cost of the project with the 22-23 budget only. So kept that number the same. So there's a lot of hidden columns in here, but this could be a tool that you could share out that people can just get basically their assessment property, assessment on their property, punch it in, and just like Ralph's, it changes it. And Peter, to your point, the point of this was to make it very clear, because the waiver, no waiver, and auditorium, no auditorium, we tried to write it really clearly on here. So if there are any of those first scenarios, you put your assessed value in, you can see what it is over 20 years. So
and I also would note that the most expensive version was the first one. So it's not to make it look like it was being hidden off at the right end of the screen. The most expensive version is sort of
right there.
Yeah, I want to use the term front and center. It's not really in the middle, but it's the one that's right in front of you. When you enter your number in the yellow block, you're right above the most expensive potential, which would be with auditorium and without the waiver.
Right. So the cost of the project is basically that column C is directly off of the bond council's, what they fairness the bond council,
Our financial advisor.
financial advisors, the bond payments. Those are exactly the cost of the project. The mill rate basically, again, keeps the budget flat, and that only changes based upon the cost of the project. The annual increase or decrease in the mill rate, I don't know why that happened, is again, simply based upon the cost of the project. And again, this first one is new school with auditorium, no waiver, very clearly written. You then have the last one, and this is, I think, the question or the feedback we received from people about that whole concept of it's cumulative was really confusing to people. So if you look at column G, that is your increase or decrease in your taxes that year. But if you look at column H, that is your total increase over your cost of 22 and 23. So if someone wants to say, hey, my taxes are $4,000 right now, based upon this project. If you look at year one of the bond, when the bond hits, my taxes would be $1,000 more than 22, 23. So again, this is just the cost of the project. And you can see that for all of these options all the way across, is if I change it, it changes all these numbers. So we're going to say, and I'll show you, this is kind of the explanation to go with it. And so, Catherine, you were confused before about what are we talking about right now? This is kind of the explanation to go through. And this is what I recorded so far, just if we were going to use it so it was ready. So it's like a 7-minute video for the public that aligns with that document. It says, here's the cost of the projects, total cost with the waiver, without the waiver, with the auditorium, without. You go to the town website, you can click, and this is the directions on how to figure it out yourself. So this is off the town website. They would click on the school project tax information. It would take them here. They would click on the first thing they click on is tax assessment database. It would bring them to our GIS. You enter the database. You enter your address. 50 Mason Road is a town-owned property. You get your, you get onto this screen, and it shows you that you need to use the assessed value, not the appraisal. You then write that number down, you bring it back, and you then go to the tax impact tool. And when you click on the tax impact tool, which is, again, this is the tax impact tool, You say, hey, my appraised value is $97,000. This is the only box they can type into. You hit enter, it changes all the numbers. If your assessed value is $197,000, you hit enter, it changes all the numbers. So the mill rate doesn't change. What changes is your annual increase or decrease in your individual taxes, in your tax increase over 22-23. So again, a lot of Ralph's information, taking out a lot of the variables that we don't know, we can't control, and just saying, what's the cost of the project and the impact of the mill rate, you can see it. So if someone had a really high assessment, we know that 330,000 would have been a really high assessment. There's the changes, and they can just scroll across and see it. And so basically then there's the last slide on this is the explanation of what each of these columns mean. Again, trying to simplify the feedback and the understanding of how do you use this and get the information out to go, if my assessment is at 125, what's it look like for me? Multiple people can be in this document at the same time, but they cannot. So if Erica jumps in, you're going to see it'll say like anonymous animal. You can type over each other. You got to be careful. And then there's a warning of that in the video. Let the person finish, let them look at their information and leave. But you could leave this open and just let people punch their number in. And again, it's very clear. This is just the cost of the project. It is not factored in any increase in grand list, no increase in town budget. It's just what's the cost of the project over 22-23. And sorry to Scott Pellman, he told us this from day one. We wanted to add in the 2.5% to try and give some extra information, and that didn't show the cost of the project. Maybe that's why we confuse people. This is the cost of the project for each of the options.
Okay, Phil, can I ask a question? I don't mean to step over anyone. Phil, in column H, tax increase over 22-23. That is the additional tax because of the school added, that should be added to the bill that they got for 22-23, correct?
Absolutely. So if my taxes are $4,000, if you're looking at row 10 here, if my taxes are $4,000, I'm adding $381 to my $4,000 in taxes for that. That's on top of, and that's how kind of we say in the video, it's above and beyond your tax bill from 22-23. You are correct.
Okay, I think it would be wise to include an explanation that that number needs to be added to their 22-23 tax bill. I don't know if you have that in the instructions anywhere, but I think that would be wise to do that if it's not there.
Did you say that in your video?
I do, but we could actually put that on, I mean, tax increase over 22-23. Ralph, I'm gonna be honest, I went around the town office building and was showing this just for trying to get some clarity, and it's been tweaked a bunch of times. That has been the hardest column to name.
Can we just delete it?
I'm telling you, you're already getting.
Can we
What's
just
that?
delete it?
No, because that is the exact information, in my opinion, no, because that's the exact information people have been asking for. What is on top of that? So if we, to Ralph's point, say tax increase over 22-23 and put in parentheses below it, add this number to your 22-23 tax bill, you have what you'd pay in taxes that year.
We say tax increase over the 22-23, your 22-23 tax bill. Something that simple.
Yeah.
I think we did hear people say they wanted to know what the cumulative was, and we weren't trying to keep it from them purposefully. It was.
Now I hesitate saying cumulative too much because it's going to confuse.
That's why I
That's
don't.
why we took it out. It's been in.
We took that word out.
People are gonna be afraid. We're gonna hear that now, that they're afraid. This is not the new cumulative total. That this is cumulative and it's not. It's, it's.
Right, but each individual year is what we expect this project to cost you on top of this
No, this
bill.
is great.
Your bill, because it's the only known we had to start from.
Couldn't we just put the tax number in there instead of how much on top of that it is?
Because everybody's tax number is different.
But it's gonna change.
I could, but they still have to compare it to what it is now.
Right.
And we thought it was more important for them to know how much more is it gonna cost me? Because otherwise they're looking at going 3,600. What were my taxes? That's
Right.
was the challenge. You could add another column, but I'm like, ooh, the more, you saw Ralph's, right? Spreadsheet on steroids. That information, the amount of information gets to be overwhelming, and that's why they're hidden in here.
And Justin, if I'm hearing what you're saying, right, they would need to put in then two numbers, what their current tax bill was, and then their assessment, and then it would tweak it. Is that what you're saying?
Or you're saying just to have it do the math.
I'm
So you put
saying,
your assessment in, it should tell you what your tax bill is.
right, I'm saying, can't we do the math, so like that 125,000 assessed value?
I'm gonna say no, because many people have variables in their tax bill.
I was gonna ask that.
There's offsets for firefighter abatement, there's veterans exemptions, there's a multitude of exemptions people have within their own individual tax bill.
Didn't know that.
That, yeah.
And some of the land, there are various different
Yes,
ways
whether
land
it's
is
PA
taxed, open
490
space and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that would create a confusion. Catherine, go ahead.
So Phil, just to get back to that column, so I was kind of serious about getting rid of that column. And the reason why I say that is, what is column G showing then? For example, the section that's highlighted, it's got $252 as an annual increase. Well, I know how much my taxes are every year. So in my mind, when I read that, I would say, oh, it's going to cost me, instead of $4,000 a year, it's going to cost me $4,252.
That's why you need the other column, because that's not true.
That's just that 1 year. You didn't add the 2 years prior to it.
But
Correct.
why?
So if you, what did you start with? $4,000?
Yeah, let's say it's
So
4,000.
go up 2 rows to row 8.
Yeah,
You would add that $35 to your 4,000. And then the next year, you'd have 4,035 plus 101. And then the next year, you'd add the 252 on top of that, which is why
Right.
the next column over accumulates those. So that's the challenge. And that's what a lot of people have wrestled with in town. How do we
Yeah.
separate out what happens each year versus what's the cumulative effect?
So, right. so
Yeah,
we-
I
Or
mean-
whatever term we're gonna use.
I'd rather show the overall effect than the individual year if we were talking about getting rid of a column.
I think they're both valuable.
yeah,
I
I'm
think
just wondering if we, it is rather, not confusing, but it's rather complicated.
It's complicated.
I wonder if we need to even offer that cumulative. I mean, if people know what their increase is every year, they're gonna use that. So let's say that first year is 4,035. Now the next year is gonna be 101. So I'm gonna take my 4,035, I'm gonna add 101 to it, and I'm gonna get my new total for that following year. So I think we should leave it up to the people, the taxpayers, to do their own accumulation.
I disagree.
Catherine, they've already spoken. The tax people have repeatedly said in communications to us and in the live events and on social media that they want to understand the cumulative effect. They've been really clear on that.
We gave them the annual and people assumed that was cumulative and they felt it was misleading and that wasn't our intention. So I think this is
All right, so
react.
maybe, so I'm not sure the tax increase over 2022 to 23 is the right title for that column then.
That's what we just talked about.
Yeah, and then the one thing I wanted to add is Ralph on his spreadsheet, he had, see where it says note Y1? He actually had the year in there too, which I thought was helpful. Is that something we can add?
Instead of saying year 1.
Yeah, he put the year like 24 or 25. I thought that was,
No, I did put all the years in there.
yeah, I thought that was helpful. So I think if we could add that, that would just help.
You can adjust that now.
But if somebody has a great name for column H.
I,
And then
Call it cumulative, cumulative
No.
impact. Don't even say tax increase, just say cumulative impact.
Mike, can I ask a question to Phil?
Please. Please.
Phil, it's something I've always kind of focused on, but when the school opens, the year the school opens, fall of 26, there's going to be a significant savings in staffing and other maintenance costs and other costs. Does this, when the school opens, does it reflect that savings that you're going to realize year over year of the combined projects?
So that's an awesome question, Scott, and Phil and I have debated that question also, and that goes to this whole conversation about what are the variables that we can and cannot predict. And what I asked Phil to do was leave that 500,000-ish out. So that we're not trying to plug in the favorable variables and look like, you know, even though that is a favorable number, and just purely put what the tax impact is for the cost of the project. That's why there's a note at the bottom that says, you know, that there'll be an operating cost decrease right there.
Sorry, this one.
And it's a challenge, right? We wanted to try to plug it in, but then you have to show a town budget expense decrease in that 1 year where we're not showing anything about the town budget in any other years.
Right.
Right, but it would be a 1 year decrease then that would hold static. So I would take the decrease on the baseline in that year, and then it would move forward as that new baseline, which would, I mean, I just think, you know, that $500,000 plus is a significant impact to the overall mill rate.
I agree. We
Not
should
wrong.
do it.
Not,
If I could,
Go ahead, Erica.
I see both sides of this, but I see the realistic conversation has been that if we combine our two schools into one pre-K through 8, we will see a savings. So this project creates a savings. I see it as part of the project. I see why we might be reluctant to put it in, but I see that savings as part of a project.
Is that savings a fixed definitive number, or is it, I know it's open to a lot of variability, so I think it's yes, there will be a savings, we don't know how much. I think that's the problem, it becomes the same variable, like why.
I think we've been clear for years, and again, this conversation has been over a decade of seeing a savings. And so I hesitate to not put the savings of a combination of schools into the project.
Maybe we make that note bigger, move it up top so that people read it.
all right, can I comment on that, on Scott's comment?
Go ahead.
500,000 is 1/10 of a mill. Based on our grand list.
Well, here you go with your exact
But
numbers.
it's still a,
1/10 of a mill to the average homeowner is really not a significant number.
Are you sure that number is right? I feel like when we did budgets over the last couple of years, I thought 200 and some thousand change in the expense budget was, I'm guessing now, I probably shouldn't.
All right, maybe it's a mill. Maybe it's a mill. Maybe I'm off by a factor of 10.
I just don't know how after 10, but can I say after 10 plus years of having this discussion about a project and there being an operational savings, we know we don't know that exact number. We do know we've been using that $500,000 number. If that is one of the benefits, if you will, to this project, how do we not express that to taxpayers? I think it's important to, you know, to me, it makes it seem like we're saying, well, we've told you that we're gonna save 500,000, but now we're not really, so we're not gonna put it in the project.
We can actually see it in these charts. There's got to be 1 year where the change in the bond payment is a factor that we can use. It should be in our charts.
Why would the bond payment change?
Well, the bond payment declines over time.
It's the first year of the bond, though.
I know, but what I'm saying is we should be able to figure out what mill rate effect it is.
Oh, yeah. It's
He
in
knows
the,
what year.
it's in the other spreadsheets.
Right,
So the initial the original spreadsheets that we shared,
right.
it's factored into those. It's actually factored into the postcard too.
Mhm.
So the postcard we sent out where we said we
That
left,
was the 6-year postcard.
right, and this is why, you know, I agree with you, Scott, I want to put it in, but I also think we're trying to show some balance here. When we sent the postcard out, we put in 2.5% each year. That was factored in. We said what all of those factors were. We also said there would be a $500,000 decrease in the BOE budget. It's factored into that postcard, those numbers. So this would take the opposite, you know, different approach of that and say, okay, so if you just want to know the cost of the project now, we're removing all those variables.
Yeah, but I think the project includes a reduction in school operational budgets. I think that we would be remiss. I would feel like we've been dishonest for years, the taxpayers, to say that it's not gonna be part of the project. Because I see that without this project, we don't see that saving. It doesn't exist without a combined project. We're not talking about a potential. So, I mean, I totally see what you're saying. I can see it either way. I just feel strongly that it's part of the project. We're not looking at a $500,000 reduction without cutting services if we don't have 2 schools.
But is it a $500,000 reduction?
That's the number,
I know.
it's Phil's most reasonable expectation.
I'm just guessing, looking at some numbers on the screen, I'm guessing it's around $500,000, but I'm kind of winging that.
I mean, I can, hold on,
That's about right, Mike.
About,
look, I mean, this
Slightly more
is,
than a half mil.
this is the 20-year, $28 million bond right here. So when you apply this, this is the year the $500,000 savings hits. You're going, again, the cost of the project, and this is a new school with waiver. This is the year the bond hits. This is off of 3 notes. Hold on, I'll zoom in. Because the rest of it doesn't really matter.
I'm zooming myself in.
Yeah. But you can see there's a significant increase simply because the first year of the bond, that's the biggest year. So this is the change in the mill rate with the 500,000. And if you want to know the impact, this is my opinion. If you're looking at this 392, that's a $370,000 difference between these two right here. And that $370,000 difference
It's just over $1 million.
it's not even $1 million.
Oh,
It's
I'm sorry.
0.68.
Yeah. You see
I thought that was
you see
a
what I'm saying?
one for a second.
I'm giving a ballpark here,
But
so it's close to $1 million.
I want to comment. I want to agree with Erica. This has been an expectation of the community for a long time. I think what's confusing is that it's on the operational side, but it impacts the cost of this project. Where it'll be even more confusing is when it really happens, if anyone remembers, in year 4, that's where you're putting it, right, Phil?
Wherever the bond hits, yeah.
I'm sure there'll be some that will remember, but we don't know what's gonna happen to your budget, Phil.
100% agree.
So I can see a lot of folks saying, okay, year 4, there'll be a 0.05 decrease in the K budget. So $500,000 coming down from that $10 million budget. Well, by then it won't be a $10 million budget. So I'm guessing, Phil, you're gonna be somewhere in the same placeholder that you put the town, 2.5%, something like that. So that's going to go up, right? And then your other costs will change. You frequently say to us during the budget that special ed costs can be volatile.
Yep.
So it's very confusing because it may not be what the expectation is, even though, Eric, I agree with you, the expectation is
Right.
there.
You're right.
Again, this is probably way beyond our pay grade and goes back to Jim and Board of Finance.
So how about this? Let's leave the tool straight without putting the 500,000 in the way it is right now. Maybe let's emphasize the note on it a little bit more. That says there will be there's a planned 500,000, whatever, reduction in operating costs, which will be a benefit to the taxpayers or something to that effect. Just put a note on there, leave it straight up and have this conversation tomorrow night with the Board of Finance and see if the Board of Finance has more wisdom to add to this
Yeah, I
conversation.
can just make it red.
What's that? Oh,
Brianna.
thank you. Brianna,
Hi, I'm doing my best to follow along and there's a lot to learn. And believe me, I love geeking out to data as much as the next person. That's a lot of work that you've all done. I just wanted to give you a heads up that Ralph's spreadsheets and graph have already been published to social media as fact. So I don't know how this committee wants to address that, but all of those things you just had there in the red about factors that need to be considered, that was not included. I don't know what we do about that, but I just want you to know.
That's why it's, look at, we can't control that. There's another variable we can't control, right? I mean, I
Correct.
can see tomorrow that the school is gonna be $100 million, and once it's out there, you can't change it. So I think we just need to keep pushing, and Brianna, I'm glad you say that, but we need to keep pushing people to get questions to us at the SBC email, or come to the presentations, there's none scheduled right now, or look at the FAQ, or when we publish this, we're the ones saying, this is the tool, this is what you're using, whatever it is. That's our job to make sure people know that. And unfortunately, anybody can spin anything we have.
So how do people feel about getting the video he made, which is just a video of what you saw, the screenshots there, getting that video out, and that tool that he just had on the screen, once we make those couple of changes, putting the actual years in the left column, and emphasizing the note about the 500,000 a little more. How do people feel about getting that out there? I mean, that can be out on the town webpage tomorrow, right?
Yes, it could be.
And I think that's a little bit how we combat Brianna's concern. is
Right, is
we
get
have-
some
we can
real
say that
official
was-
information
That
out
was
there.
something we discussed, and we were in discussions. This is the information of the SBC, and combat that like you have some other inaccuracies.
Right, Ralph?
The 500,000 potential savings is on the operational side anyway. So the calculator that Phil has worked out, I'm fine with that, and you can make note of the 500,000, but it's really on the government budget. It's not on school construction.
Right.
It's an offset on the overall town budget, yes, but on the operational side, not from the bond payoff side, not from the cost of the school.
That's right.
Agreed.
So I think putting the note at the bottom is fine. I'm good with that. And I like Phil's calculator, actually.
Well, it's not just mine.
There's a lot of people that do a lot of work on that. A few people have had their fingers in that. Yes.
A lot of tests
Wherever
of
you
it,
are, I think
It's-
you will.
It's gotten tweaked a few times.
and it's been.
I'm
tested
sure.
Here who. has
Yeah.
no Skin in the game. I don't live.
I
here.
learned my house assessment is way above the average, which I plan on reviewing now.
Well, the Board of Assessment Appeals, Mike.
A whole other meeting.
I know, it's a whole other meeting. I know. Catherine?
I just wanted to recognize the fact that there was a lot of work that went into that. Just by looking at it, you can tell, and I just want to thank the committee members who put that together and for taking the time to explain it to us. So thank you.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of work on the one we were just talking about, and there was a lot of work in the subcommittee's work, especially Ralph's work on the giant mega NASA spreadsheet system he
Yeah.
created there. I guessing by the time of day he sent me some of the emails and text messages, I'm guessing he was up some late hours and spent a lot of his weekend working on this. So I want to make note of that. A lot of people put in a lot of extra hours over this last the last week or so, trying to find a way to get better financial information out. Because clearly we're all hearing from the people that this is the toughest area to resolve.
So do you want to, because this all ties together to tomorrow night too.
Yeah.
The presentation that Mike sent out in the email today was actually the draft of what we're kind of holding together for the Board of Finance was this. So you all have this already. What's that? I'm sure it's already out there too. It's fine. I guess my question now is the Board of Finance, and I'm just going to get down to the tool page because we had this as a slide. This might not be to the level of what the Board of Finance is looking like. I mean, Ralph, you put a ton of time to that spreadsheet. You can't verify my numbers. I can't verify yours, but they may want to ask Ralph to run some of those numbers just to see. The spreadsheet that we have does not do that.
Doesn't do that.
So,
right.
you know, that's kind of up to the committee as far as if you want another slide in here that's prepared for the Board of Finance or not, should they need it. Part of me says yes, part of me says it's also their job to figure that out, but, so I'm torn on that. But I also want to control the message, because we can verify where those numbers came from. So that's, I think it's a
So
question. I have.
my thinking, and I really want other opinions from the committee here. My thinking is that the presentation you just showed, that we continue on with that presentation.
Right.
But that Ralph is there, ready to roll, whether he's in person or at his computer, however he wants to do it. He's ready to roll with some more detailed stuff, and then we can introduce the fact that Ralph has some more in-depth data. And then the Board of Finance can decide, and I assume they will decide to want to see it and talk about it a little bit. And we can just say, you know, like, here's our presentation, but if you want to dig into background information, Ralph's done some work. You just have to understand that that's, you know, there may be some interpretations and
Variables.
the variables, like some of the bond information he had was older, although I think you've tried to update it today, right, Ralph?
I did update it today, Mike.
Okay, so, you know, so there's,
If I might
it
make
should be fairly valid.
one suggestion, it might be beneficial to show, like, to just add a single line instead of showing the whole 20-year run out on those four scenarios, just add the 20-year end of completion of bond mill rate, just as a point of comparison, because I know they.
Oh, at the very end, to
Yeah,
a
just
final
like
line.
to say qualifying line at the bottom. I don't know if it'll be too confusing, but it'd be nice to see where we wind up for project impact at the bottom of the bottom.
You said you're gonna do that, Mike.
So I just want to make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying what the last year is or what the peak year was?
You have the peak year.
Right.
You're saying right here,
What I'm saying is, at
line 31 would be.
no, I'm in your presentation tomorrow night.
Oh,
Add
gotcha,
that-
gotcha.
that
Yeah,
detail.
that last, that.
Okay.
line, So you're seeing the full impacts, the Board of Finance knows what the end. you know.
So
Not
the whole thing is in
That
the
thing right there.
presentation, but you're saying is highlight that bottom
Just,
line.
no, you don't show the end of the bond there, that's only.
Yeah, well, that's
Shows
it,
your
that-
five, so
I'm
you
just
say-
saying,
I'm
add a
sorry.
line, add a line that just says this is where we wind up.
Yes,
Not in the
thank
tool,
you,
but-
sorry.
Okay.
See, this is why Mike,
I've seen them enough this week, I'm starting to differ.
It might have
Yes.
been a request for 10 years, but you know, if we can just show,
Okay,
I think showing the whole schedule
This-
is more than that.
this
slide.
is exactly the confusion that with me emailing the wrong things out. Yes, I was thinking of the wrong
Yeah.
presentation
They
from what
start
you were
to
saying.
realize.
Okay, got it.
The bond
And-
is.
and
paid
I stand,
off. Is that your
if I'm
point?
any, Klein?
Yeah,
I just want to make sure I
No
understand this
yes,
question.
in a new, not in a new slide, but
Well, I'll make it bigger,
yeah, then that would be helpful.
yes.
But yeah, no, just, you say, at bond payoff, here's the completion, this is what.
Gotcha.
The impact is.
This is your presentation in the end, so you're the one doing it, so
I hope I understand it by then.
Yeah, it just to give it, so you don't have to run the whole.
Yep.
Thing, on a slide.
Okay, I've got a whole bunch of questions. Everyone hang in. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Eric.
just, you know, to Phil's point, the message that's going to Board of Finance is the school building committee's data. If they feel the need to do additional analyzing and additional data, I think that falls to the Board of Finance.
Yeah.
And so not for them to come back and say, okay, we want you to create something different. I think they have some work to do if they need above and beyond. Not that this committee is willing to, but this committee has determined what its data and information is going to be and put forward. And then they use that to make their decision. If they need to analyze a little bit more, it has to be on them to do the work.
Right, and that's why I think giving them the option tomorrow night, if they want to dig into Ralph's material, understanding that, you know, that's stuff Ralph has pulled together. If they want to dig into that, give them the option to play with that data, and then they can decide of their own will or willingness if they want to, and what they want to interpret from that data. And the reason I'm thinking that is because there's a huge amount of work done there that they might be able to leverage instead of redoing it. That's my thought on that. Yeah, hang on, I had Catherine's hand up.
Okay.
Just real quick, while I like both of Phil's and Ralph's spreadsheets, I feel like if we're tossing around both of those spreadsheets, that might get even more confusing. So I think if there's a way that we can land on one of the spreadsheets, whether it be Phil's or Ralph's. I don't know if there's a way to include that wonderful graph that Ralph had showing the impact to the mill rate when the percentage was 0. I don't know if there's a way to snippet that and put it into the presentation and use Phil's graphic spreadsheet, but I don't know. I feel like if we're tossing around two different spreadsheets, it might get even more confusing.
Well, I agree with Catherine. However, that's the job of the Board of Finance, to consolidate all this information and present what they think is understandable to the community. That's kind of their job.
But I think, Peter, a little to my point was, if we're, are we putting out 10 different messages for them to analyze? Or are we putting out one piece? And that's to Phil's, what is our message? Is our message going to be, here are 14 different tools of which you can analyze best? I think that too could be confusing. That's why I said it's, we have a message and the work of this committee, and that's what we're putting forth to them. Or how much of that are we putting forth? Are we putting forth 5 different views?
Well,
I think that gets confusing, and then you get the
That's a
public
good point you
sharing.
make, Erica.
Many
I'd
options.
like to comment again. This tool tells us the cost of our project, which I think is great. Congratulations, Phil.
Not just me.
But yes, there's other variables. And the Board of Finance needs to express that somehow. And I'm not sure how they will do that.
So my feeling would be that, again, as I said before, we do our presentation with the version that you're seeing there and that Phil just went through. We do our presentation. And then we say, I mean, people know this information's out there, right? It's being spread around the internet right now. The information's out there. And we say, and a member of our committee has done a bunch of other research. If you'd like to tap into that, he'd be willing to share it. But we've completed our sort of our official report. That way they have the benefit of looking at it and deciding what they want to interpret or use or whatever.
I agree, because Jim's right. They haven't seen anything yet. The Board of Finance is 0. So for them to just get our project cost is a great starting point. But I agree with Erica too, that meanwhile, people are jumping on Phil's cool site and calculating their assessment.
Good news is it's not live yet.
It's not live
His
yet.
site isn't live yet.
But it will be, you know, even before the Board of Finance meets to find out what this cost is they're facing.
Right, and we can say that tomorrow night. We can say we rolled it out today, people are using it.
Are we going to have some sort of, I hate to sound like an attorney, but disclaimer, saying this is just a project cost. There are other costs the town faces in functioning as a town.
Well, it is pretty clear in there that this is just the project
I
cost.
think that's the disclaimer.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's good, because that's essential for people to know.
Sure,
They're
yeah.
calculating the cost of a school, but if we need to buy a new ambulance, if
right.
other costs.
And that is really incumbent upon the Board of Finance also
Yes.
to
Yes.
analyze that, think about it, decide how to present it.
And I think that's where Ralph can be extremely helpful in the presentation, because he can do a lot of what if scenarios. That 2.5% could be 11% this year with our budget increase. So, you know, we don't know, but I'm sure the Board of Finance has some idea. You know, they're doing that right now.
Yeah, I mean, we've had years where the Board of Finance has raised the expense budget but lowered the mill rate. So there's so many variables.
A lot.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. Ann.
I really like Phil's, because I think the voters are going to need to make a decision about the school, and it shows the impact of the price of the school on their taxes. But at the same time, I think you could use Ralph's to kind of make the point that this is the impact that the school is going to have on your taxes. Excuse me, but that Ralph shows that there probably will be other factors.
And I think the right place for that debate is at Board of Finance.
By the Board of Finance.
Yes, right.
I think that's the key.
At
Right?
Board
I
of
mean,
Finance, by the
we
Board of
shouldn't be asking Ralph to go to the Board of Finance and run 20 different scenarios. I just caution that that's not, if that's the message of the SBC.
Well, again, as I said, I think the message is, here's our presentation, but there's a lot of background work. If you'd like to work with Ralph and tap into some of his resource, it's up for you to decide what you're gonna use and what the veracity of the data is.
I'm more than willing to sit with the Board of Finance tomorrow night. So.
Thank you, Ralph. I sort of assumed you would be ready for that, but thank you for confirming. So do we have consensus that as soon as Phil finishes the edits, we'll get that tool and the video out to the public so that they can start working with the numbers? I've seen pretty much. Okay. So that's a go on that, Phil. Okay. You have anything else on this topic? We have more discussion about this topic. I just don't want to, if you have something else.
No,
that
I'm
you
good.
wanna, present, whatever. Are we done with this agenda item for tonight?
Yeah.
All right, thank you to everyone, especially the people who have done work on building these various tools and stuff. We all know who everybody is. We've talked about it a lot tonight. And thank you for everyone on the committee for thinking through it, looking at it, providing feedback. This is probably one of the critical pieces of what we're doing right now. Maybe the critical piece of what we're doing right now. Okay. Future business items for future agenda, anything anyone wants to introduce?
No, I don't want to introduce it. You could just kind of maybe highlight us in a correspondence of the milestone schedule that Scott spoke about and the items that would need to be begun between now and referendum, right? So I hear him saying we have to start that process so that after a potential positive referendum, we could, this committee could take action on.
So what you're saying is to make sure that the milestone, anything
Yeah.
that affects the agenda
Right.
with the milestone.
Yeah, I think
gets
that's where
included.
some of those future agendas are, but not having seen the updated one.
Yeah, there are a couple of emails left there. I'll get everything out tomorrow to any of the last stuff. Anything else on future agenda items? Okay. Present to speak.
Before you go there,
What?
you skipped over your chairperson's report. Do we need to?
Oh, I was gonna throw it in at the end, but I don't, all right, so I'll just do
Didn't want you
that.
to forget. Do you want to wait?
Thank you. I'll just do it right now. So there's been a huge amount of work done in the background the last few days. I struggle with one thing, and that is the amount that certain members of the committee sometimes are contacting outside agencies and groups, particularly without the chair knowing. And I don't want to discourage the hard work, especially like subcommittees have things they need to do. I just want to ask people to be careful, because sometimes I get dropped into a conversation way late in the conversation, and I don't know that other resources are being tapped. And including sometimes Scott's billable hours, because people send emails and they include Scott, and then Scott feels the need to respond. And now we're adding billable hours. So I would just ask everyone to make sure they're being careful about contacting outside agencies as a SBC member without at least the chair knowing about it or agreeing, depending if it's going to cost us money or whatever. But I don't want that to be seen as none of the things that happened the last few days should have happened either. Like if Ralph had to go through me to get every piece of information, there's no way I would have been able to process all those requests, get them to all the right people in the amount of time. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying be careful. When you reach out and represent the committee, someone has to be responsible for that. So I would make that comment. And then also, just because I have the opportunity to try to clarify something that came out in the earlier present to speak. The foreseeable costs are included in the plan. There's a public document already out there that shows the contingency. The contingency cannot anticipate every scenario, but we are not at this time looking into the cost of running a water main. It's simply not a practical exercise at this moment. it would be well beyond the contingency, so we cannot possibly factor in that amount. As we do our due diligence and we get further along, if the taxpayers approve it, we'll have to do test wells. We'll have to determine if the water's there or how we handle that. There are a couple different ways of handling it, including storage tanks, slow draw wells, things like that, but there's just a whole world of things that we can't anticipate. So I just want to be clear on that. The discussion about a water line is not possible in this process right now. So that's it. Present to speak. We'll start in the room. Okay, online. Nick?
Hey, Nick Tella, 49 Myrtle. So just want to start off with the calculator that Ralph had explained earlier. I think was awesome. It wasn't misleading like the SBC one was, where it basically didn't encompass increase in government spending and such. I think Ralph did a great job in capturing everything and being able to alter it to see if there's other expenses and such. I think, again, it's just forward thinking, unlike the other one that was presented. I think both calculators, though, should have some kind of disclaimer, just stating that the true cost of the project is not being captured, since hall and center, along with miscellaneous costs, have not been identified. I think Mike stated something just recently there, to all costs being there, which is, again, not true, because we do not know all true costs. Operational decrease is total speculation. Phil has stated that there would be 440,000 in salaries, and has hinted that some of the teachers may be let go, as to why he doesn't want to get into that. So he doesn't want teachers to leave early. I would like to see some kind of explanation as to what staff would be let go. Last point here. Erica has tried to basically paint a picture as though she's stepped back from this whole role and she's not voting and such. She's deeply involved in this, while her family is set to take advantage of the taxpayer. I really think she should be totally excusing herself from this whole process, because she's already tainted the process and is going to continue to do so by being involved, even though her family is going to profit off the taxpayer. Thank you.
Other present to speak? If you don't have the yellow hand to raise and you want to speak, unmute and call out your name, please.
Just raise his hand again.
Who?
It was a mistake, sorry.
Okay. We're all set in the room again. Last call. Okay. I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Can I get a second? Sure. All right, all those in favor of adjournment, wave and say goodbye.
Aye.
I think.
Unanimous. All right, good night, everybody.